The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show, the home of geek, folklore and paranormal entertainment with me, Charles Christian, as once again we delve into the worlds of weirdness, urban myths, pop culture, ghosts, magic, witchcraft, the occult, and anything else I think will intrigue you. We start with some good news. Researchers in the Netherlands, we'll call them Dutch boffins, have been conducting studies into the movement of the Tyrannosaurus Rex dinosaur using three-dimensional computer modelling around an almost complete T-Rex skeleton and measuring the spacing between fossilised T-Rex footprints. According to their calculations, in real life, T-Rex ambled along at a leisurely pace of just under 3 miles an hour. That's 4.6 kilometres. All of which means that if a human ever encountered one, all they had to do was run away. Of course, this will make future Jurassic Park movies a little tame. Oh no, the T-Rex has escaped. What shall we do, Dr. Malcolm? Dr. Ian Malcolm is the character played by Jeff Goldblum, as of course you all know. Walk away, briskly, says Goldblum. The end. Roll credits. Now time for our interview, where we are joined by American writer, historian, antiquarian and mystic Robert W. Sullivan, who is talking about Freemasonry, particularly the Royal Arch of Enoch ritual, plus we'll also be discussing the symbolism involved in many cinema movies, including the Da Vinci Code series and James Bond. Robert Sullivan, who lives in Baltimore, Maryland, is the author of a number of best-selling books, including The Royal Arch of Enoch, The Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy and Symbolism, plus 3 books on cinema symbolism. We'll have links to Robert's website and his Amazon authors page in the podcast metadata, as well as on the urbanfantasist.com website and our Weird Tales Show YouTube channel. Right, well, it's great to be speaking to you, Robert. Now, before we go much further, just tell us about yourself and how you came to be interested in these topics, where we're covering everything from occult symbolism to aspects of Masonry, Freemasonry.
Sure, absolutely. When I was a child and when I was a boy growing up, I was always interested in UFOs, cryptozoology, mysticism, the supernatural, ghosts. It was just an inclination I had. It was just something that always fascinated me. And I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and I come from a line of my ancestors, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them were Freemasons. Mm-hmm. My great-grandfather on both sides, my grandfather. And this was something that always kind of just fascinated me. And I obviously couldn't join as a boy. I was obviously too young. But it was something that I just, it was just something I was naturally inclined to. And But of course, I went away to college and I went to law school, and it was in between college. It was in between after I got out of college and before I went to law school, where the opportunity presented itself to join a lodge of Freemasons. The opportunity came from a mutual friend of mine who was a friend of my mother and father. Mm-hmm. And this would have been going back this was going back almost 25 years now, let's see, this would have been the summer of 1996. So a few moons ago. And I petitioned the lodge and I joined. I petitioned it like you would and filled out the application. I sent the fee in, and sure enough, the application was approved. And through most of 1997, I went through the degree work with the Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master Mason degrees. I was initiated, and I became a Freemason. And it was shortly thereafter that I kind of just began researching. This was just something I did independently. Masonic symbolism, its impact on society, how it had shaped society. This was something I had first encountered when I was a student at Oxford University. I went to Gettysburg College here in the United States. That's my alma mater.
Mm-hmm.
But I spent my junior year abroad at Oxford at St. Catherine's College, and it was really over there that I sort of became aware of what you would call like the Hermetic tradition and its influence on society, popular culture, material culture, things like that. And I just began researching it and looking into it. And a lot of it, what I was coming to find out was that a lot of the people in the lodge were not aware of this. It's essentially sequestered away in these old, dusty, leather-bound books that, few Freemasons really take the time to look at. But if you really crack the spine and you start looking at them, a whole slate of truths will become apparent to you. At least they did to me. And the first book I wrote, the first book was The Royal Arch of Enoch, and the thesis of this book was how this one particular high degree titled The Royal Arch of Enoch was incorporating elements of the lost Book of Enoch, which shouldn't have been happening because that book was lost to Western civilization from around the 2nd, 3rd century up until approximately 1821 when it was rediscovered, and it wasn't until 1821 until it was translated in English. And when I was doing all this, sort of my Masonic teaching, my experience in the Blue Lodge and the high degrees, it sort of had this unique side effect where I started being able to kind of decode these movies on these deeper esoteric levels, which spawned another 3 books. And again, it's just something I've always been interested in. And, it's just something that, has always just fascinated me, and it's been with me. And I was able to parlay it into 4 books and a work of fiction as well.
With the Masonry, now, both my parents were Freemasons in England, which is a separate system to the Scottish system. But I know my mother was very intrigued with the symbolism of it all, and she became a member of a number of the higher degrees. I think they called them the sword-carrying lodges and things, and she was it one of the Knights Templar and Mark, I think. Anyway, so I've got some background, but I think is the American Freemasonry based more on the Scottish version rather than on the English version?
Well, the Blue Lodge degrees come from England. Mm-hmm. Those are the same. Those run parallel. The first 3 degrees of Freemasonry, the Entered Apprentice, the Master Mason degree, and the Fellowcraft. I set them out of order, but those 3 remain the same. The 2 premier high bodies in the United States are the Scottish Rite and the York Rite. The York Rite is primarily an American invention. The Scottish Rite is actually French in origin. It actually comes out of Paris, France.
Useful names they've got then.
Yeah, it calls itself the Scottish Rite because of Scotland, because this is where a lot of the early lodges pre-1717 were admitting, we're admitting non-operative Masons. We're admitting non-stonecutters, essentially. Yes. So they named it after Scotland. And there's some other Scottish elements that turn up as well, but the actual Scottish Rite is actually French in origin. And that's not as popular as it is in the United Kingdom, and than it is here in the United States. And the answer is quite simple, for 2 reasons. One is it comes out of France, mm-hmm. Which is pretty much the mortal enemy of England since time immemorial. Yeah. And it also associates with the Jesuits, which are somewhat persona non grata also in England. Yes. But it becomes very popular in the United States, and really it's the 2 high degree bodies in the United States. They do run parallel with each other. Many of them contain a lot of the same degrees, the same symbolism, things like that. But the Blue Lodge is really, when you get into the first 3 degrees, that's pretty much uniform around the world. That's with the 3 degrees: the Entered Apprentice, Fellowcraft, Master Mason. Those 3 degrees come straight out of England, and those are pretty uniform around the world, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, it's intriguing that the concept of the 3 degrees has been borrowed by the more esoteric groups. I mean, Aleister Crowley's rituals were based on 3 degrees, and Gerald Gardner's Wicca is also based on 3 degrees.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of those secret societies, such as, the Golden Dawn, the OTO, the one in France that's, that a lot of people don't know aware of. I think it's the Kabbalistic Order of the Rosy Cross. Make a long story short, whenever you're dealing with one of these sort of auxiliary esoteric orders, in some form or fashion, there will be a nexus to Freemasonry where they're borrowing from the rituals. You will even find that here in the United States with the college fraternities and sororities. Many of the rituals of the college fraternities and sororities right here in the United States were written by Freemasons. And I know that to be true. When I was at Gettysburg College, I joined a fraternity house called Lambda Chi Alpha. And the guy, this is just, it's coincidental, but the guy who wrote the ritual for my fraternity house was named Jack Mason, and he was a Freemason. So you will find that, and again, Crowley was a Freemason. So none of this should be surprising. Whenever you're dealing with these esoteric orders, they always seem to just turn to Freemasonry for, kind of an outline of how to write rituals, what the rituals should look like. Even like Anton LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan here. I think even he says in one of his books, when it came time to do the rituals, what was the first thing I looked at? The rituals of Freemasonry, just as a guide.
Yeah.
They are very influential, no doubt about it.
Yeah. You also see aspects of Freemasonry in things like the tarot cards, don't you? Some of the imagery on those is Masonic.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you're dealing with Freemasonry, you're dealing with a lot of esoteric ideas being sort of incorporated into this one, secret society. I say in the book, and I've said it on numerous other shows, when you're dealing with Freemasonry, really what you're dealing with is sort of what I would call the inheritor. It depends on how you want to term it. You could either call it the inheritor or the continuation of these Greco-Roman Egyptian mystery cults, whether it be the Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic mysteries, and really the one that kind of takes the cake is the mysteries, the Osiris, Isis, Horus tale, mythology, as it were. The whole idea of death and resurrection, that's abundantly apparent in the Blue Lodge rituals. And again, when you're dealing with these elements of alchemy, Gnosticism, Rosicrucianism, you're always dealing with these archetypes that are imprinted on the tarot cards. Some of the symbols that, you're absolutely correct. You're dealing with, I think on one of the cards, there's a count of 32. And again, this has to do with the 32 degrees, that turn up in the Scottish Rite. I think on the one card, I think it's the Emperor. He's wearing somewhat of what appears to be a quasi-Masonic apron. You absolutely, when you're dealing with the occult and esoterica and Freemasonry, you're dealing with a lot of things that overlap, whether it be Gnosticism, alchemy, these mystery schools, and certainly tarot cards are no exception. You will definitely see it decided. I wouldn't go so far as to say they're Freemasonic, but you can definitely see an overlap with Freemasonry on some of the cards. I don't dispute that.
So let's get on with the Royal Arch.
Sure.
What's the significance of it? You say, I'm just looking at some of your notes, that it's had an imprint on things like the template for the District of Columbia. That's, Washington, D.C. Tell us all about that.
Sure. The first book I wrote, The Royal Arch of Enoch, is the thesis of this book is, like, I said earlier about how this ritual, the ritual is the 13th degree in the Scottish Rite, it's the 7th degree in the York Rite, it's part of the high degree bodies, and really it's one of the most, and you could possibly almost argue the most important degree of all in Freemasonry. It's a really long, complex story, but I'm going to try to condense it as best I can.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that there's a lot of significance with it. Number one is in the Blue Lodge, rituals. The rituals revolve around the Mason trying. It's somewhat of a what you kind of equate to like the search for the Golden Fleece or the search for the Holy Grail. The Masons are running around looking for this thing called the lost word, or the secret word, and the word is the name of God. And in the rituals of the Blue Lodge, this word is possessed by this architect named Hiram Abiff, and he's the architect of Solomon's temple. And as he's nearing completion of the temple, he's murdered, and the word is lost. You will routinely hear the lost word of a master mason searching for the lost word, and it's kind of like a symbolic Grail quest. Quest for the Golden Fleece. Call it what you will. In the Blue Lodge, they don't have the word; they have a substitute word, which is used, and it's a password. When you fast forward to the high degrees in the Royal Arch ceremonials, the reason why these rituals, these two rituals, they run parallel. They're the same thing essentially. What's going on in the Royal Arch ritual is Solomon's temple has been destroyed. The Jews are living in exile in Babylon, the Jewish people, and the Babylonian emperor, a man named Cyrus the Great, has dispatched a Jewish governor named Zorobabel, whose name means the heart of Babylon, back to the Holy Land to rebuild the temple, to build the second temple. If you're familiar with the high degree bodies of the Scottish Rite, of the York Rite, you will constantly see the phrase rebuilding the temple, or the temple rebuilt. That's what this is a reference to. And at any rate, to make a long story, try to make it short. As they're building this temple, they discover a trap door in the ground, and they investigate the trap. They go down and they find this subterranean vault, and in this vault is the lost word. The word is restored, and like I said, it's the restoration of the name of God, and this is what's recovered in this Royal Arch ceremonial of the name of God. It's really, like I said, the ultimate degree in Freemasonry, and it's around this ritual, this recovery of this sacred name, that you will find all sorts of references and architectural ideas and templates being used in operative, in actual architecture, whether it be the District of Columbia. You can find it with the construction of the Erie Canal. You can find it in colleges and universities. You will get a lot of solar references. The sun is very important within Freemasonry as a symbol, and you will get a lot of Masonic Royal Arch references when you start investigating the architecture of Washington, D.C. I mean, and it's all over the place. When you have the symbolic eye for it, and you understand the symbolism and the philosophy coming out of this degree. I mean, you'll find it here. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. You'll find it here in Baltimore. You find it in New York. You'll find it with the Erie Canal. You'll find it with colleges and universities. You'll find it on the logos of the states. You'll find it even on the logos of some of the colleges and universities. The biggie is Union College in Schenectady, New York. And you really begin to understand it when you begin to unfold this and investigate this mystery, that it really is this one degree that the country is sort of being crafted around. And it's it's this idea of finding this divine name, finding this divine word, and the implication is, since you're crafting the kind of the new country, the new world around this, that it's divine in and of itself. It's what you would call in Kabbalah the Shekinah, this sort of divine presence. And like for example, in the Scottish Rite, it's the 13th degree. Well, if you know anything with the DC and the dollar bill, you'll know the number 13 is omnipresent. It's all over the place, and it's a reference to this degree. So this is what the first book was about, the Royal Arch of Enoch, and it was documenting really two things. The thesis was, and the ritual is important because, and this is what makes it even more strange, is the ritual is coming out of Paris, France in the 1740s, 1750s, but the Book of Enoch is lost. According to mainstream history, the Book of Enoch isn't found until around 1773, when a man named James Bruce returns from Ethiopia with a couple copies. And even then, it's not translated into English until 1821. Yet someone out there, some secret library or something, had access to a copy of this, or at least to an outline of it, because you will see elements. I mean, it's not a verbatim copy of it, but you can definitely see concepts and themes related to this embedded in this Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial that's coming out of the Lost Book of Enoch. So it's doubly important in that aspect. That's really the thesis of the first book.
Right, gotcha. Yeah, give us. You've mentioned the number 13 on dollar bills, and there's I haven't got one in front of me, but there's a pyramid, isn't there, on it as well, with an eye above it or something?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's more of a solar emblem than it is really probably Masonic. But when you're dealing with solar symbolism and Masonry, the sun is the most important symbol within Masonry. The Blue Lodge is laid out based on the movement of the sun, with the worshipful master in the east, as the rising sun, the senior warden in the west as the setting sun, and the junior warden in the south as the sun at midday. This is how the governance of a Blue Lodge is divided. It's triple divided. This is why the United States government is triple divided between a chief executive, a legislature, and a judiciary. The triple division of government in the United States comes straight out of the Blue Lodge. It's based on the governance of the Blue Lodge, which again is a solar emblem. I mean, a lot of the principles of the country come straight out of Freemasonry. The separation of church and state comes out of James Anderson's Constitutions of the Freemasons. The all-seeing eye with the pyramid. A lot of the Masonic histories trace Masonry back through Egypt and to the flooding of the Nile, which created geometry, which is one of the basis of Freemasonry, operative Freemasonry geometry. So you're dealing with, again, especially here in the United States, you're dealing with a lot of when the founders who created this country, many of them were Freemasonry, Freemasons, excuse me. They were just turning to this. I mean, they knew when they went into revolution against George III. I mean, and it's also interesting. It was 13 colonies. I mean, I find that kind of interesting. They knew when they were establishing the country, they knew what they didn't want. They didn't want a monarchy, and they didn't want some sort of Vatican-styled religious organization. So, I mean, what these guys all belong to, the secret society that's egalitarian, democratic, separation of church and state. Hey, let's just turn to this and use this essentially to create a country around. And essentially, that's exactly what happened. I mean, the influence of Freemasonry on I go so far in the Royal Arch of Enoch book to call the United States the world's first ever Masonic republic. You could even stretch that even a little further, and if you wanted to, and I would have no problem saying this, you could even go so far as to say it's the world's first Masonic Enochic republic, because so much of it comes out of this Royal Arch of Enoch ceremonial. So again, when you're dealing with the dollar bill, which is just one example, what is it? You got the number 13, I think, on one part of it. I can't remember. I don't have the book in front of me, but there's the number 32 turns up, and then the number 33 turns up. That's clearly a reference to the Scottish Rite. So you definitely get this overtone of Freemasonry going on, not only with the Great Seal, but with the actual creation of the government itself.
And of course, back at the time of what we call the War of Independence, the American Revolution, France was helping the independence movement, and Benjamin Franklin subsequently was the ambassador to France, wasn't he, and seeking assistance?
Well, that's right. I mean, Franklin got the French involved through his connections with a lodge in Paris, which was one of the more occult lodges called the Temple of the Nine Sisters. Franklin had been a Grand Master. He was a Grand Master of the state of Pennsylvania. And when he went over there, he used his Masonic connections through this one lodge. He is actually, believe it or not, Benjamin Franklin is the guy who actually initiated Voltaire into the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, which is very interesting. Yeah. And another guy who also joined that same lodge, or at least was a member of it, at least in an auxiliary fashion, was John Paul Jones, who founded the United States Navy. So Franklin was using his Masonic connections through this Temple of the Nine Sisters to rally support in France to the American cause. And of course, it's no state secret. I mean, it was really, I think, for the French. I think for the French, it was more they were interested in helping the Americans, but I think it was more an interest of just, seeing the British defeated.
Yes.
Than it was. I think that was France's, motive more than anything else, was to kind of embarrass England. But at any rate, they did join in the American cause, and certainly you could craft an argument, and I think it's a legitimate argument. I mean, this is one of the reasons why the high degree, such as the Scottish Rite, really took off in America, is because they're French. I mean, they were midwifed into the country from Paris through Haiti. And again, it's one of the reasons why in the United Kingdom, especially in London proper, where the high degrees are not very popular, many English lodges frown upon the high degrees. They don't recognize them. This is not the case in the United States. The York Rite and the Scottish Rite are both recognized by all the state Grand Lodges, and again, they're completely voluntary, but they're very popular here in the United States. Most Masons, one way or another, after they get their third degree, most, not all, but most usually go into one of those two bodies, if not both of them.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
Tell us something about the impact of the Royal Arch on architecture. I mean, that's one of the things that's often said, that Washington, D.C. is laid out in a particular way, and the way various cities are designed. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Right. Well, I mean, so for example, just in the template itself, you have with the Royal Arch, and this ties into the Blue Lodge. I mean, you have the emblem of a Masonic worshipful master who represents the sun embedded right then and there. You have the Pythagorean theorem, the 47th proposition of Euclid, the Pythagorean right triangle formed by the White House. The executive mansion, which was designed by a Freemason, James Hoband, to the Washington Monument, which is an obelisk, which is a solar emblem, up to the United States Capitol along the Mall. The United States Capitol has a dome on it. If you're familiar with Vitruvian architecture and Palladian architecture, the dome is a temple. The dome designates the building as a temple of the sun god Apollo. So we have another solar reference. And then, of course, you have the two elected branches of government connected by the hypotenuse, the United States Capitol and the White House, which is Pennsylvania Avenue. This is all Royal Arch Masonry. Pennsylvania is known as what? The Keystone State. Well, what creates a Royal Arch? A keystone. So you have that, and that's how the Royal Arch of Enoch, the secret word, is found. They're clearing the rubble from Solomon's Temple, and they find a trap door in the ground, and the trap door is Hiram of its keystone. And they spring the top of it, and there's this subterranean vault with this treasure vault underneath of it, underneath 9 arches, and there, lo and behold, is the Ark of the Covenant and the sacred name of God. So yeah, I mean, right then and there, you have this 47th proposition of Euclid, which is a solar emblem. And I should also point out that when they spring the trapdoor, the way the secret name of God is found is the sun's rays illuminate the vault, and they can see the secret word down there. So the sun, again, plays a very important role in this. But right then and there, you have this whole idea of the 47th proposition of Euclid, the solar emblem, which in Rosicrucianism represents, the sacred trinity, Osiris, Isis, and the hypotenuse is the perfected child, Horus. The keystone, Pennsylvania Avenue, right there embedded in the city. And I'll just end on this. If what I'm describing, this whole idea of finding this treasure in this subterranean vault, this lost Masonic treasure beneath the holy ground, if this begins to sound familiar, it should. It's the National Treasure movie. The first National Treasure movie is the Royal Arch of Enoch ritual. If you ever want to see a Masonic ritual on the big screen, watch the very first National Treasure movie. That's the whole movie. The location of the Masonic Knight Templar treasure vault, subterranean treasure crypt beneath the holy ground. In the movie, they set it in New York City, which is a complete reference to a man named DeWitt Clinton, who was the former mayor of New York City, the governor of New York State, and a very critical Royal Arch Freemason. So again, a lot of this is known by these people in Hollywood, and they use it to great effect.
Yeah. And of course, the Da Vinci Code follows some of these ideas, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah, I mean the Da Vinci Code, the movie also incorporates a lot. The whole idea with the Da Vinci Code, which I found very interesting, is if you pay attention to it and you read this between the lines. It's been a while since I've seen the movie. When the whole idea, and this you have to know a little bit about the Royal Arch of Enoch. The underlying story with it is the mythology with the ritual is that that the biblical patriarch Enoch, after his little visitation with the heavens, he comes back to earth and he knows the flood of Noah's coming and it's going to erase mankind. And what he does is he tries to trick God. And he doesn't try to, he does. So Enoch creates this subterranean vault upon which on these two pillars, he inscribes all this wisdom that he's learned in the afterlife, mathematics and the 7 liberal arts and sciences. And he conceals it with this secret name down in the treasure vault. And the mythology is if you go in and you pronounce this word correctly, you can restore this wisdom that's encoded on these two pillars. And this, according to the Masonic legend, is what happens. The first person to discover the treasure vault is a guy named what's his name? It's Pythagoras, who goes into the treasure vault and says, Eureka, right? I have found it, and pronounces the name of God and restores the mathematical pillar back to mankind. The liberal arts pillar is restored by a character called Hermes Trismegistus, who breaches the vault and restores the 7 liberal arts and sciences back to mankind. So the whole idea within Masonry is when you discover this treasure vault, the candidate is becoming the symbolic Pythagorean Hermes-like magus, as it were. Mm-hmm. And it's the restoration of all wisdom. If you watch the Da Vinci Code, and it's interesting, and again, I can't remember it off the top of my head just because it's been so long since I've seen that film. Yeah. But every time they need a clue or every time they need a hint or information, the number 13 pops up. And again, it's a reference to this ritual of the restoration of wisdom, that every time knowledge is needed, the number 13 pops up. I mean, even in the National Treasure movie, in the second one, where Riley's talking about where all the wisdom is kept. He said, oh, that's chapter 13 of my book. That's where the secret information is. So again, anytime you see 13 popping up in that context, that's a reference to this degree, where, it's the restoration of wisdom, knowledge is needed, things like that. What's funny is for the actual thing with the Da Vinci Code, that whole thing was invented by that guy, with the Priory of Zion and that stuff, by this guy named Pierre Plantard. Yes. There's actually a poster that exists, and this is where the whole thing comes from. There was a poster put out by for this guy in France. His name was Josephine Paladin, who was this Rosicrucian enthusiast, and he was an artist. And he created this series of Rose Croix saloons for artists to express themselves. And on one of the posters, he has this image of this holy angel descending with the Grail. And he has on the poster Dante Alighieri dressed up as Hugh de Payens, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar. And he has Leonardo da Vinci dressed up as Joseph of Arimathea. I mean, it's clear when you see this, Pierre Plantard must have seen this poster to concoct this whole idea of the holy blood, holy grail, this bloodline with these secret guys being part of the secret, Masonic, Rosicrucian, Martinist society. And when you research it, it all seems to go back to this poster for this Rose Croix saloon, which I think occurred around 1896, 1897. It's a fascinating story.
Yeah. And of course, once again, we're talking about France, where it all emanates from.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Rennes-le-Chateau and everything of that nature. Yeah. Okay, let's go on then about how Masonic symbolism or esoteric symbolism has popped over into pop culture, particularly in movies. You've already talked about the National Treasure, and I believe they've finally agreed there's a third one going to be coming out or being made of that series. But it crops up elsewhere, doesn't it? I mean, in lots of other movies.
Well, yeah. I mean, the one thing that it became very apparent to me when I started analyzing these movies on an esoteric level was it wasn't only Freemasonry. I mean, it really was this whole treasure trove of the occult. Whether it be Gnosticism, Masonry, the archetypes, whether, and when I say the archetypes, you're dealing with, imagery relating to the tarot cards, solar allegories, the whole idea of what Joseph Campbell called the monomyth. I mean, this stuff really does, turn up in so many movies. I've written 3 books about it. And, whether it be, Masonic, Gnosticism, the occult in general, and it predates Hollywood, but, you will just, when you get tuned into it, you really do become apparent that these movie makers out in Hollywood, just have a whole palette of techniques that they use to convey different things. And these guys are really expert at it. It goes far beyond the more I do it and the more I look at it, the more I'm amazed at it. It goes beyond. It really is. These guys are really creating this mythology. And they really, the experts, depending on the sophistication of the filmmaker, some of these guys really know what they're doing, and they really know what they want, and they know how to do it. Some not as much. Some are better than others. And it's just, it amazes me, it goes beyond just symbolism in film. It goes to music that is used, the specific actor or actress that can be used, costuming can convey different things. They use these mnemonics that's almost akin to what I would call what Giordano Bruno was talking about, like the art of memory, things like that. And it's just really, they use, Gnosticism, alchemy. And when I say alchemy, I'm not really talking about turning base metal into gold, but when you see alchemy on film, it's usually a transition of a character from one thing into another, and they're very good at it. They know how to express it in the Renaissance terminologies and the color scheme, and it's just really, when I watch it, I just sit in awe of some of these movies and just how much they are aware of what they're doing and how expert they are. And it's some of the movies that are really stand out to me. And like I said, it's not necessarily Freemasonry. It is in some instances. I guess National Treasure would be the godfather of the Masonic movies. But it's just, it's some of these movies. It's like every time I watch it, I kind of pick up on something new. It's like, oh yeah, I pick up on that before. And that to me is really the telltale sign of a quality, sophisticated filmmaker. And again, for me, Charles, it just goes back to my kind of training. I don't like to use the word training. Maybe that's not the right word, but my participation in Freemasonry. I don't think these books would have existed or could have existed if I wasn't a Freemason and didn't take the time to really understand the symbolism of what I was looking at. I'm convinced of that. So if it wasn't for my Masonic membership, I don't think these books would exist. And it's just something I never envisioned myself doing it. I never in a million years saw myself as some sort of like movie critic or analysis on an esoteric level. I never saw that, for me.
Yeah.
But it's something that just kind of came up, and I love doing it. So
yeah, talking about the movies, what about something like the Sergio Leone's original spaghetti western trio?
Sure. Right. Well, what you're doing with those is Sergio Leone was raised a Roman Catholic. And when you're looking at those spaghetti Western movies, specifically the Dollars trilogy, Duck You Sucker has some archetypes in it as well. But when you're looking at the Dollars trilogy, you're looking at Christian imagery. It's a form of what I would call Catholic mysticism, where clearly he plays around with it in the first one, which is Fistful of Dollars. Then he toys with it in the second one, which is for a few dollars more. But by the time he gets to the good, the bad, that's where he kind of knows what he's doing and kind of really does a great job with it, where clearly the Clint Eastwood character, you go to the first one, Fistful of Dollars. The Clint Eastwood character is clearly the Christ, figure, who's trying to unify Madonna and child, Marisol with her little, with the infant, Marisol, Mary, Madonna and child. He winds up murdered. He goes into a subterranean vault and is resurrected, where he defeats the devil character, the Rojas one of the Rojas brothers. And then, you have the Clint Eastwood character as sort of the, Christ figure, the Christ archetype, the solar, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Christ figure. This is something he really runs with by the time. The second one, few dollars more, he does a little bit more, but he kind of, that one, not so much. But then when he gets to the good, the bad, that's when he really goes all in on this, where you clearly have Blondie, which is Clint Eastwood, as the Christ figure, the good. Even when he's introduced, you have I remember when Tuco the Ugly is about to be hanged, Angel Eye says, and a guardian angel watches over that filthy beggar. And then when Clint Eastwood appears on screen, you hear the angelic music right behind him. So he's being clearly identified as the Christ redeeming figure, and then Angel Eyes, interesting name to give him, is the devil. And then you have these two competing forces, good versus evil, the devil versus God or Jesus, competing for the soul of humankind, which is the ugly character. They're both trying to ally with him to get him in their favor. And of course, he's called the ugly because it's the fall from Eden. Humankind is in a state of sin after the fall, so he's the ugly. And the whole movie is about God and Satan, Blondie, Blondie, Jesus, the bad, Satan, trying to win the soul of the ugly, which is humankind. And then, you have the whole Gnostic idea at the end of it, where Tuco's running around the graveyard. I got to give credit to a friend of mine named Miguel Connor who told me this, so I didn't come up with this on my own. But I thought this was just really interesting, where you have the whole idea of Tuco there at the end, running around in circles where the ecstasy of gold is being played, and you have this kind of Gnostic lesson that's being learned, where you have where he finds the gold, or at least he thinks he does, and the name on the tomb is Arch Stanton, and it's empty. There's no gold there, and it's in the tomb next to it. And it's the idea is it's the search, it's the quest for materialism leads nowhere. And if you take a look at the name on the grave, Arch Stanton, if you remove the S-T-A-N-T in Stanton and you combine it, you get the name Archon. And I always thought that was really interesting, that basically you could say that Tuco has fallen victim to the Archon, of one of Gnosticism's Archon, who's trying to keep him immured in materialism. He's questing for gold, and it winds up getting him nowhere. And then, of course, Blondie, who is Jesus, finds the gold, the solar light, and he's enlightened, and he gets to keep the gold, the representation of the sun. I always thought that was just really interesting. And again, this is produced because of Leone's Catholic upbringing. You could craft an argument this is our archetypal. This is what Jung called the archetypes, where this is all part of his subconscious, and it's just manifesting on screen because it's an artistic expression. I think there's an argument to be made for that, but I definitely think the whole idea with the whole idea of the God versus the devil fighting for the soul of mankind, I think he incorporated that completely intentionally. And I'll just fast forward and I'll end on this. There's another filmmaker who's Roman Catholic who uses these exact same techniques in a movie he made years later. Martin Scorsese made a movie in the early 2000s called The Gangs of New York. And this incorporates the same imagery of this whole idea of God versus the devil, where the William Dafoe character is Satan being cast out of paradise or Paradise Square. The Leonardo DiCaprio character is the Jesus figure who's killed and resurrected in the tomb. And you will see that. You could see a clear parallel between the Gangs of New York movie and the third of the Dollar Trilogy's movies, where it's this whole God versus the devil thing. It's very well concealed, but it's in there. These were two movies that I analyzed in the second book. But no, I believe it's definitely, like I said, it depends on the sophistication of the filmmaker. But I definitely believe it's intentional. Like I said, these guys are grand masters of it.
Part of the quest, if you like, in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly is to find the correct tomb. It's the one with no name, isn't it? I think. Right. Yeah, which is going back to the Royal Arch of Enoch and looking for the lost name of God.
you could also craft an argument, and I think that you could also say that it's unknown, and that like I said, this is kind of a Gnostic tenet that the God of the God above God, the God above the demiurge is unknown. But Blondie seems to be in tune with this, not humankind. And you have a lot of religious allegory. I mean, you wind up, with where I think Tuco mentions Judas Iscariot at one point. He winds up hanging. So, again, a lot of religious symbolism going on inside that movie. And, you will find Hollywood gets beat up as being, you hear all the time, oh, this is, devil worshiper, it's evil. I mean, you will find, believe it or not, the Jesus Christ archetype, the savior figure, the solar savior figure, in numerous films. I mean, in some he's more obvious than the other. I mean, for example, the guy in The Green Mile, the Michael Clark Duncan character, John Coffey, JC, Jesus Christ, I mean, who dies for the sins of the South and resurrects the little mouse, can heal people by clearing them of their illness. I mean, is a Christ figure. JC, James Cole, 13 Monkeys, JC, who comes back in time and is trying to warn mankind about the impending doom, but no one takes him seriously.
Yeah.
The one in the Day the Earth Stood Still, the guy who comes down from the heavens, and gets the name John Carpenter, JC, Carpenter for Jesus, who's trying to warn humankind. So the Christ figure, the Christ solar archetype, can be found in film. He doesn't appear; he can be concealed sometimes, but he is there, and that's a fascinating study. That's something I talk about in a lot of the books that I've written.
And looking at the movies, there's an awful lot where the hero is almost killed. We've talked about that with Blondie, and well, it didn't even have a name at all, I think, in the first one, Fistful of Dollars. But, it crops up in an awful lot of other ones. I mean, you get elements of it with Luke in the Star Wars. You get it with Han Solo, who is frozen in whatever he's frozen in and is resurrected. And
Harry Potter,
yep.
Neo Anderson in The Matrix is killed and resurrected. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the monomyth. This is it's interesting. If you read Campbell's book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, he describes this. I don't know if he didn't know this or not, or if he knew it and he just didn't put it in. I find it hard to believe he didn't figure this out. But he talks about this archetypal figure and this hero's quest that he goes on, but he never says who the hero is. I mean, he never says who the hero personifies. And the answer is the sun. It's a solar allegory, combating darkness, combating the works of darkness. I mean, whether it's Luke Skywalker going against Darth Vader, Harry Potter going against the Death Eaters, whether it's Frodo Baggins going against Sauron. I mean, and Mordor. I mean, it's the same story. I mean, it's the exact same story. Or Jesus going up against the devil, same sort of thing. So it's very archetypal, and I mean, Hollywood knows this, and they know how to use it. And again, you will find this in some of the biggest blockbusters that have been ever made. I think that's pretty irrefutable.
More recently, the John Wick novels, it's the same thing there.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with those, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. He almost dies in them and comes back and then goes on a quest. One thing I would like to just talk about is what you, looking in my notes, what you call the occult world of Ian Fleming. I mean, people think James Bond, spies, movies, that's it. No real hidden agenda in there. But you say there is an element running through it with the connection with Fleming and Aleister Crowley and Dennis Wheatley, who wrote The Devil Rides Out. There's a connection there. Tell me something about that.
Yeah, this is one of those talking points that comes out of the file cabinet titled "You Can't Make This Stuff Up." That's absolutely correct. During World War I and World War II, Aleister Crowley, the Great Beast 666, was a spy for the British government. He was a double agent. And during World War II, his handler in British counterintelligence was none other than Ian Fleming, of all people, of course, who wrote the James Bond stories. And the guy, the two other characters, I mean, you're absolutely correct that, kind of hung around with Crowley. One of them was Dennis Wheatley, who wrote Devil Rides Out. And of course, you have the Mokata character in that, who is played by Charles Gray in the movie, who is clearly based on Crowley. And then the other guy was the guy who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Roald Dahl, was also part of that circle. And I'll go back to Fleming, but it's always interesting. This is already an interesting talking point. The Mokata character, you can't help it years later. I mean, it's clearly the Crowley analog. Years later, when Ira Levin wrote Rosemary's Baby, the black magician in that is named the same name. It's Mercata. It's the same name phonetically. And Rosemary's Baby, the movie, and Devil Rides Out came out in the same year, 1968. And they had the characters have the same name. It's the same guy. It's Aleister Crowley. They're both based on characters named Mercata in Devil Rides Out and Mercata in Rosemary's Baby by Polanski and written by Ira Levin. That's really interesting. But yeah, Fleming was Crowley's handler, and of course we know the story that when Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, flew to Scotland or was trying to fly to England on the botched peace mission, that when they put him in the Tower of London, Crowley went to Ian Fleming, who wanted the permission to do these occult rituals in front of Hess to scare him, to get him to try to talk about the Nazis' interest in the occult, astrology. I mean, many of the higher ups in Nazi Germany and the Third Reich were interested in the occult. Himmler, yes. Goebbels, Hitler, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, when you get to the James Bond stories, I mean, you will find this, hermetic, alchemical themes going on all over the place. I mean, my God, the 007 sigil for James Bond comes straight out of the world of John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's court astrologer, who was one of her spies, who spied for her when he went to the Holy Roman Empire and spied on Rudolph II. When he would ever write an espionage correspondent, he would sign it 007, and it was meant to look like spy glasses or eyeglasses. And of course, the idea was that he was her eyes in the field, and this was for her eyes only, which is where those terms come from. So, I mean, right then and there, you have James Bond as essentially John Dee. I mean, and a couple of the characters in the Bond stories, I mean, you have Blofeld, I believe, is based on Crowley. I mean, there's this part in the story where Blofeld was trying to fake a coat of arms, and I think Crowley tried to do that at one point. And then the villain in Casino Royale, I forget his name. I think it's Casino Royale. That's also based on Crowley, who was a sadomasochist. And there's a scene in Casino Royale where the villain is torturing James Bond. So that was based on Crowley. I mean, and then you get into the whole idea of Rosicrucianism, the alchemical wedding, the unification of the sun and moon, the hero Gamos, where Bond, the sun, must unify with the sacred feminine, the moon, the Bond girl. This equips him spiritually to go to take him to be able to defeat the villain, whether it's the Illuminati character Blofeld, who wants to take over the world, the alchemist Auric Goldfinger, who's trying to transmute the gold in Fort Knox. I mean, it's just it's this very hermetic thread. I mean, you've got the Hermes Trismegistus character in Q, who is the wisdom provider, who makes all the gadgets, possesses the sacred knowledge. So with the James Bond stories, I mean, you definitely have this occult Crowley influence upon Fleming. You'll find it in the Wheatley story, with Devil Rides Out, of course, where the Mokata character is clearly based on Crowley. That's not the only one. Of course, we have Mokata in Rosemary's Baby. And then the other one that's kind of lesser known is the Boris Karloff character in The Black Cat. Halimar Pearlzig, that's a Crowley analog. So yeah, I mean, Crowley turns up in Hollywood from time to time. They've never really made a story about Crowley, but certainly Crowley's influence can definitely be felt, no question about it. And I mean, it's just a fascinating subject. And again, the whole influence with Crowley and James Bond and Ian Fleming, I mean, that's just a fascinating subject matter.
Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, Robert. What plans have you got going forward? Are you writing new books?
Yes. Well, right now, as we're doing this, the third movie book, Cinema Symbolism 3, has just been released in print edition. The ebook is still probably a couple weeks away. That'll probably come out around the end of the month, end of April 2021, early May 2021. But the print edition is out. My next project is, and I've already started this, is I've published 4 books already: Royal Arch, 2 other movie books, and a work of fiction. These books I want to edit a little bit. There's a couple things I want to add, I want to subtract. Yep. So it won't take me too long, but I want to edit. I want to tweak some of these books. There's a couple things in there that I wasn't happy with. There's a couple things I want to add that I think need a little clarification. So my next project is to go back and tweak the other 4 books. And then after that, we'll see. I might do some more fiction. I might do another movie book. We'll see what happens.
Right. Well, plenty to keep you busy. It's been a fascinating conversation. One of those conversations where, as you say, you end up talking about things you'd never imagined would be connected with it. Freemasonry to Clint Eastwood as the man with no name. Anyway, Robert, many thanks for your time and good luck with your future projects.
Well, thank you, Charles. Thanks for having me on Weird Tales. It was my pleasure being here, and I look forward to returning. We'll do this all again maybe in the near future.
That would be great. Thanks very much indeed.
Good day, gentlefolk. I doth have breaking news. Your Weird Tales host, Charles Christian, has written a new book called Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. 5 shocking true tales that are stranger than fiction. There's murder, mayhem, treason, incest, adultery, and worse. Read about the real antics of 9 saints. Yes, saints. 8 kings and 5 queens of England, plus the wickedest of all stepmothers. And be amazed, or horrified, or appalled, or all 3. If you love weird history, and methinks you do, hop over to Amazon for your copy of Charles Christian's Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. Grab yours now.
And that's it. We're totally out of time. A big thank you again to this week's guest, Robert Sullivan. And before we go, let's end on a motivational note, courtesy of the British publisher Angry Robot Books on Twitter. Count Dracula was aged 412 when he moved to England in search of new blood. Sauron was 54,000 years old when he forged the One Ring. And Cthulhu had seen galaxies flare into life and fade into darkness before he put madness into the minds of men. All of which means it's never too late to follow your dreams. Now it just remains for me to say this is Charles Christian saying thank you for listening in. Please join me again next week for more weird tales in weird times. Until then, stay well, stay weird. Goodbye.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, folklore, and the paranormal. You can keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com, by email to urbanfantasist@icloud.com, and on Twitter @urbanfantasist. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Goodbye.